The rope cut so deep into her wrists that blood dripped onto the snow, but Clara Weston refused to scream. They'd dragged her through the streets at dawn, beat her when she fought back, tied her to a post in the town square like a dog waiting to be put down. "Pick any woman you want," Marshal Garrett announced to the crowd, grinning like this was Sunday entertainment. "These criminals need husbands to keep them in line." Men laughed, women whispered, children pointed. But in the back of that crowd, a widowed cowboy stood frozen because his twin daughters had just grabbed his coat with trembling hands. "Papa," they whispered together. "That's her. That's the lady who saved us from the snow." Stay with me until the end and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Caleb Thornton heard his daughters before he understood them. "Papa, that's her." He was still staring at the three women tied to posts in Silverbrook's town square, still trying to make sense of what Marshal Garrett was doing up on that platform, offering up human beings like horses at auction. "Papa." Lily yanked his coat harder. "Are you listening?" "I'm listening, sweetheart. We need to go home. This ain't—" "No." Rose planted herself in front of him, her 6-year-old face fierce in a way that reminded him so much of Maggie, it hurt. "You have to look at her. The one with dark hair. Look at her face." Caleb looked. The woman stood between two others, an old lady with her eyes closed in prayer, and a young girl sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. But this one, the dark-haired one, she wasn't praying, wasn't crying. She was staring straight back at the crowd with eyes that burned like hellfire. Someone threw a chunk of frozen mud. It struck her shoulder. She didn't flinch, just turned her head real slow toward the thrower, some red-faced farmer in a threadbare coat. "Missed my face," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You want to try again? I ain't going nowhere." The farmer stumbled backward like she'd slapped him. "Papa?" Lily's voice cracked. "That's the lady from the snow, the one who saved us." Caleb's blood went cold. "What did you say?" "The red blanket lady." Rose grabbed his hand with both of hers squeezing tight. "She found us when Mama died. She wrapped us up and sang to us all night. She kept us warm, Papa. She gave us her blanket, and she was shaking so bad, but she wouldn't leave us. Girls, we ain't lying." Lily was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We ain't never lied to you, Papa. That's her. I know her face. I know her voice. Please, please, you have to help her." Caleb stared at his daughters, then at the woman on the post. 2 years ago, his wife had died in a blizzard. His girls should have died with her. The search party found them the next morning wrapped in a red wool blanket that didn't belong to anyone in the family, singing a song nobody recognized. For months they'd talked about a dark-haired lady who found them in the snow, kept them warm, promised help was coming. The doctor said it was hallucination, trauma making up stories. Caleb had believed that. He'd had to believe that because the alternative was too painful, that someone had saved his children, and he'd never been able to thank her. "Well, well," Garrett's voice boomed across the square. "Looks like we got a shy crowd today. Come on now, gentlemen. These women need husbands. Who's going to step up?" A few men shuffled toward the crying girl. Someone muttered about the old woman being useful on a farm, but nobody went near the dark-haired one. "What about that one?" someone shouted. "The Weston woman." Garrett's grin spread wider. "Ah, Clara Weston. Now there's a special case. Poisoned her husband Daniel 6 months back. Arsenic in his evening coffee, they say. Watched him die slow over 3 days." The crowd hissed and murmured. Clara Weston didn't react, just kept standing there, chin up, bleeding into the snow. "Any takers?" Garrett scanned the crowd with theatrical disappointment. "No. Can't say I blame you. She's pretty enough, but that kind of pretty usually comes with a knife in your back." Laughter rippled through the square. Caleb felt his daughters pressing against his legs, felt their small bodies shaking with sobs. "Papa, please. She saved us. Don't let them hurt her. Please, Papa. Please." God help him. He started walking. The crowd parted around him, confused at first, then buzzing with whispers. Caleb heard his name passed from mouth to mouth. The horse breeder, the widower, the quiet one who never came to town unless he had to. He stopped at the edge of the platform and looked up at Garrett. "I'll take her." Garrett's eyebrows shot up. "Come again." "The Weston woman, I'll take her." Dead silence. Then the crowd erupted. "He's gone mad. Those poor children. She'll kill him in his sleep." "Thornton, you damn fool!" Garrett held up his hands, still grinning. "Now hold on. Caleb Thornton, ain't it? The horseman." He leaned forward, eyes glittering with amusement. "You sure about this? That woman murdered her husband, poisoned him like a rat. You want to bring that home to your little girls?" "I'm sure." "You don't even know her." "I know enough." Garrett studied him for a long moment. The grin faded into something harder, more calculating. "You know," he said softly, "most men would ask questions before taking on another man's problem. Most men would want to know the details, the evidence, the testimony. Ain't most men." "No." Garrett's jaw tightened. "No, I reckon you ain't." He snapped his fingers at his deputy. "Cut her loose. She's Thornton's problem now." The deputy approached Clara with a knife. She didn't move as he sawed through the ropes, just stood there swaying slightly. Her eyes fixed on Caleb with an expression he couldn't read. Suspicion, confusion, fear. But not the kind of fear he expected. Not fear of him. Fear of hope. Caleb pushed through the crowd and stopped in front of her. Up close, the damage was worse. Bruises layered over bruises, some fresh, some fading yellow. A split lip barely scabbed over. Dried blood in her hair. Someone had beaten her. Recently. Repeatedly. He shrugged off his coat and held it out. Clara stared at it like he was offering her a snake. "It's cold," he said simply. "You're shaking. I don't want your charity." "Ain't charity, just a coat." "Why?" Her voice cracked on the word. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't know what I am." "I know what my daughters say you are." Clara's eyes darted to the twins, who were watching from the edge of the crowd, their golden hair bright against the gray winter morning. Something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or the ghost of a memory, and for just a second, her mask slipped. "Those girls," she whispered. "I've seen them before, in dreams. I thought—" She stopped, pressing her hand to her temple. "I thought I was going crazy." "Maybe you were remembering." "Remembering what?" "Saving their lives." Clara's breath caught. She looked at the girls again, then back at Caleb, and he watched her fight to hold herself together. Watched her jaw clench and her hands ball into fists at her sides. "I don't remember," she said. "I don't remember any of it. But even if I did—" Her voice hardened. "Even if I saved 100 children, it don't change what they say I am. It don't change what I might have done." "Did you do it?" The question hung between them. Clara's eyes met his. Dark brown, almost black, burning with exhaustion and defiance, and something that looked a lot like despair. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Some days I think I must have. Some days I'm sure I didn't. But it don't matter what I think, does it? Everyone's already decided." "I ain't decided." "Then you're a fool." "Been called worse." Caleb pushed the coat toward her again. "Take it. We've got an hour's ride and I ain't explaining to my girls why I let their snow lady freeze to death." Something cracked in Clara's expression. Just for a moment. Just enough for him to see the woman underneath the armor, exhausted, terrified, desperately trying to hold herself together. She took the coat. Her fingers brushed his as she pulled it on, and he felt how cold she was. Ice cold. Like she'd already started dying, and nobody had bothered to tell her body. "Let's go," he said. They walked through the crowd together. Caleb put himself between Clara and the worst of the hissing and spitting, his hand hovering near the small of her back without quite touching. The twins ran ahead to the wagon, scrambling into the back and making room. "Murderer!" someone shouted. "Witch! She'll kill them all in their beds." Clara's stride faltered. Caleb felt it, the tiny hitch in her step, the way her shoulders curved inward like she was bracing for a blow. "Keep walking," he said quietly. "Don't give them the satisfaction." "Easy for you to say. You ain't the one they want dead." "Give it time. By tomorrow they'll want me dead too for taking you." Clara made a sound that might have been a laugh, rusty and broken, like she'd forgotten how. They reached the wagon. Caleb helped her up onto the seat, or tried to. She pulled her arm away the moment he touched it, and climbed up herself, moving stiff and careful, her jaw tight with pain she wouldn't acknowledge. "I don't need help," she said. "Didn't say you did." He climbed up beside her and took the reins. Behind them, the twins had gone quiet, watching Clara with those huge blue eyes that saw too much for 6-year-olds. "Mister," Clara's voice was barely audible. "You just made a terrible mistake." Caleb clicked his tongue, and the horses started moving. "Reckon we'll find out." They'd been riding for maybe 20 minutes when Clara spoke again. "Those girls, Lily and Rose, right?" Caleb glanced at her. "How'd you know their names?" "They told me. Back in—" She stopped, frowning. "Back in the square, I think. Or maybe—" She pressed her fingers to her temples. "I don't know. It's all mixed up. Like trying to hold water." "You remember anything else?" "Pieces, snow, so much snow. And singing, I was singing something. An old song my grandmother taught me about the river and the mountain." She shook her head. "I don't remember why. I don't remember who I was singing to." "You were singing to us," Rose piped up from the back. "Me and Lily. We were so cold and Mama wasn't moving, and you came out of nowhere and wrapped us in your blanket." "The red one," Lily added. "It was so soft and warm. But you were shaking 'cause you didn't have a blanket anymore." Clara turned to look at them, her face pale. "I stayed with you all night," Rose continued. "You promised help was coming. You said we just had to hold on a little longer." "And then the sun came up and the men found us," Lily finished. "But you were gone. We looked and looked, but you were gone." Clara's hands were trembling. Caleb could see them shaking against her knees. "I had a red blanket," she said slowly. "My grandmother made it. Cherokee pattern, she was half Cherokee, my grandmother. She gave it to me before she died." She closed her eyes. "I lost it that winter. I woke up in someone's barn 3 days after the storm with frostbite and a fever, and the blanket was gone. I thought I'd dropped it somewhere in the snow. I thought—" She stopped. "You didn't drop it," Rose said softly. "You gave it to us. You saved us." Clara made a choked sound. And then she was crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears of a woman holding herself together. These were ugly sobs wrenched from somewhere deep, her whole body shaking with the force of them. She pressed her hands to her face and cried like she hadn't cried in years. Caleb didn't know what to do. He kept his eyes on the road, kept the horses moving steady, and listened to the woman beside him fall apart. Behind them, he heard rustling. Then felt the wagon shift as Lily crawled over the seat back. "It's okay," his daughter said, pressing herself against Clara's side. "You're okay now. Papa won't let anyone hurt you." Rose appeared on Clara's other side, small arms wrapping around her waist. "We've got you," she said, "just like you had us." Clara cried harder, but her arms came up shaking and pulled both girls close. And they stayed like that, a bruised, broken woman holding 2 little girls who should have died in a blizzard, until Clara's sobs finally quieted and her breathing steadied into something like peace. Caleb kept driving. He didn't say anything. Some moments didn't need words. Ciao. The ranch came into view as the sun started sinking toward the mountains. "This is it," Caleb said, pulling the wagon to a stop. "Ain't much, but it's warm, and it's safe." Clara lifted her head from where it had been resting against the seat back. At some point in the last hour she'd fallen asleep or passed out. He couldn't tell which. The twins had covered her with one of the blankets from the wagon bed, and were now watching her with the fierce protectiveness of children who'd decided something belonged to them. "Where?" Clara blinked, confused. "How long was I?" "About an hour. You needed the rest." "I don't need—" She stopped, looking around at the modest house, the barn, the corrals full of horses. Then down at the blanket tucked around her shoulders. Then at the two little girls pressed against her sides. "What is this?" she whispered. "What are you doing, taking you home?" "This ain't my home." "It is now." Clara stared at him. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, her face still mottled with bruises, but underneath all that, he could see her fighting to understand, fighting to trust, fighting the part of herself that had learned the hard way that kindness always came with a price. "I don't understand," she said. "Men don't do this. They don't take in strange women without wanting something in return." "I want you to rest," Caleb said simply. "I want you to heal. And I want you to help me figure out what really happened to your husband. Because I've seen guilty people, Mrs. Weston. I spent 5 years in the cavalry watching men do terrible things. I know what guilt looks like." He met her eyes. "And whatever I see in your face right now, it ain't that." Clara's breath caught. "You don't know me." "No, I don't. But my girls do. And they ain't never been wrong about anyone." He climbed down from the wagon and held up his hand to help her. This time, after a long hesitation, she took it. Her fingers were still cold, but not as cold as before. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you inside. We can figure out the rest tomorrow." Clara stepped down carefully, wincing at the movement. The twins scrambled down after her, already chattering about the room she could have the food they would make the horses she had to meet. Caleb watched them lead her toward the house. This woman who'd saved his children, who'd been accused of murder, who'd been beaten and broken, and offered up like livestock, and he felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been frozen solid for 18 months. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The house was warm from the fire he'd banked that morning. Clara stopped just inside the door, looking around like she expected the walls to close in on her. "Guest room's upstairs," Caleb said. "Girls show her where the wash basin is. There's clean clothes in the trunk. They were Maggie's. She'd want someone to use them." Clara's head snapped toward him. "Your wife's clothes. She died almost 2 years ago, in the same blizzard you pulled my girls out of." He held her gaze. "Seems fitting somehow." Clara opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I don't know what to say." "Don't have to say anything." He turned toward the kitchen. "I'll get some food started. You look like you ain't eaten in days." "I haven't." The words were quiet, matter of fact, like going hungry was just another part of her existence now. Caleb's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Well," he said, keeping his voice even. "That changes tonight." He walked into the kitchen before he could say anything else. Before he could ask who had starved her, who had beaten her, who had looked at this woman and decided she deserved to be treated like less than human. Behind him, he heard the twins leading Clara upstairs, their voices high and excited. "This is going to be your room. Papa fixed the window last week so it don't stick anymore. The bed's real soft, you'll see." Caleb stood at the stove, hands braced against the counter, and took a long, slow breath. "What have you done, Thornton?" He'd brought an accused murderer into his home. A woman he didn't know, whose story he hadn't heard, whose guilt or innocence was a complete mystery. He'd done it because his daughters pointed at her and said that's her. He'd done it because something in his gut screamed that what Garrett was doing was wrong. He'd done it because when he looked into Clara Weston's fierce, exhausted eyes, he saw someone who'd been fighting alone for far too long. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to find Clara standing in the kitchen doorway, wearing one of Maggie's old dresses, faded blue cotton, that was slightly too big for her thin frame. She'd washed the blood from her face, brushed the tangles from her hair. She looked almost human again. Almost. "Girls fell asleep," she said quietly. "They were telling me about the horses and just dropped off. Both of them. In my bed. They've been doing that since their mama died, sleeping in piles, like puppies." Clara's lips twitched, almost a smile. "I should—" She gestured vaguely. "I should go somewhere else. Let them have the bed." "Stay with them. They want you there." "Why?" "Because you make them feel safe." Clara flinched like he'd hit her. "I'm not safe," she said. "I'm the opposite of safe. I'm accused of murder. I've got a marshal who wants me dead or worse, and I don't even know if I'm innocent." Her voice cracked. "How can I make anyone feel safe when I can't even—" She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth, turned away. Caleb waited. "I'm sorry," Clara said finally, her back still turned. "I'm sorry. I don't usually—" She took a shaky breath. "It's been a long time since anyone was kind to me. I've forgotten how to handle it." "You don't have to handle it. You just have to accept it." "I don't know how to do that either." Caleb crossed the kitchen slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. She didn't. "Look at me," he said. Clara turned. Her eyes were wet again, but she wasn't crying, just standing there raw and exposed, every defense stripped away. "I don't know if you killed your husband," Caleb said. "I don't know what happened that night. But I know what my daughters saw in you. I know what you did for them in that storm. And I know—" He stopped searching for the right words. "I know that whatever comes next, you ain't facing it alone. Not anymore." Clara stared at him. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you—" "Because someone should have done this a long time ago. Someone should have looked at you and seen something worth saving instead of something to use or break." His jaw tightened. "Consider this me making up for every bastard who didn't." Clara made a sound, half laugh, half sob. "You really are a fool," she said. "So I've been told." They stood there for a moment, not quite touching, not quite separate. Then Clara did something that surprised him. She reached out and laid her hand on his arm. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know if I deserve this. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you. But thank you for seeing me, for—" Her voice broke. "For choosing me when everyone else wanted me dead." Caleb covered her hand with his. "You ain't got to repay anything. Just rest. Heal. And when you're ready, tell me the truth about what happened to your husband." Clara's eyes flickered. "And if the truth is that I killed him, then we'll figure out what to do next, together." Clara studied his face for a long moment. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because some of the tension finally drained from her shoulders. "Together," she repeated like she was testing the word. "I haven't had it together in a very long time." "Well," Caleb squeezed her hand once, then released it. "You do now." Later that night, after Clara had gone back upstairs to sleep beside the twins, Caleb sat alone in the parlor, staring into the dying fire. What had he done? The question echoed through his mind, but it didn't feel like a mistake anymore. It felt like a beginning. A dangerous beginning, maybe. Garrett wouldn't let this go. The town would talk. Someone would come, eventually demanding answers, or blood, or both. But for the first time in 18 months, his house didn't feel empty. For the first time since Maggie died, his daughters had smiled like they meant it. And somewhere upstairs, a woman who'd given everything to save two strangers was finally sleeping without fear. Caleb didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. He'd walk through hell itself before he let anyone hurt that woman again. The fire crackled, the snow fell soft against the windows, and in the silence, Caleb could have sworn he heard singing an old melody drifting down from upstairs about a river and a mountain and finding your way home. His daughters' voices. And underneath them, barely audible, broken, but healing Clara's voice. Learning to sing again. The sound of hoofbeats shattered the quiet just before dawn. Caleb was on his feet before he was fully awake, his hand reaching for the rifle above the mantel. Outside, he could hear horses more than one, and voices low and urgent. He moved to the window, and his blood went cold. 3 riders. Badges glinting in the gray morning light. And at the front, sitting tall in his saddle, with a smile that promised nothing good, Marshal Wade Garrett. Caleb didn't move from the window. His knuckles went white around the rifle stock as he counted the riders again. 3, all armed, all wearing badges, and Garrett sitting there like he owned the whole damn territory. "Papa," he turned. Lily stood at the bottom of the stairs, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Rose appeared behind her a moment later, and then Clara, pale tense, already reading the danger in his posture. "Get back upstairs," Caleb said quietly. "All of you. Who is it?" Clara's voice was steady, but he could see her hands shaking. "It's him, ain't it, Garrett? Go upstairs. Take the girls. Lock the door, and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Clara didn't move. "He ain't here for a social call, Thornton. He's here for me." "I know what he's here for." "Then let me go out there. Let me—" "No." The word came out harder than he intended. Clara flinched, and Caleb forced himself to take a breath. "Listen to me," he said, crossing to her, keeping his voice low so the girls wouldn't hear. "Whatever happens out there, you stay inside. You understand he can't touch you on my property without a warrant, and I'm betting he ain't got one. You don't know that. I know the law. Even out here there's rules, and right now you're my responsibility. My property, my rules." Clara's eyes flashed. "I ain't property. That ain't what I meant, and you know it." He grabbed her arm, gentle but firm. "Please, just trust me. Can you do that, just for the next 10 minutes? Clara stared at him. The fight drained out of her, slowly replaced by something that looked almost like faith. 10 minutes, she said. After that, I'm coming out there whether you like it or not." "Fair enough." He released her arm and turned to his daughters. They were watching him with those huge blue eyes, scared but trying not to show it. "You two stay with Clara. Hear me keep her company. Don't come outside no matter what. Papa is the bad man coming to take her away." Rose's voice trembled. Caleb knelt down and pulled both girls into his arms. "Nobody's taking anyone, I promise. Now go on. Be brave for me." He kissed their foreheads and stood. Clara was already herding them toward the stairs, but she paused at the bottom step and looked back. "Caleb." It was the first time she'd used his given name. "Be careful," she said. "He don't fight fair." "Neither do I. Not when it matters." Something passed between them, understanding maybe, or the beginning of trust. Then Clara was gone, pushing the girls upstairs, and Caleb was alone with the rifle in his hands and murder in his heart. He walked to the front door and stepped out onto the porch. Garrett hadn't dismounted yet. He sat on his horse like a king surveying his kingdom, that same oily smile plastered across his face. His two deputies flanked him, hands resting casual on their holsters. "Morning, Thornton." Garrett tipped his hat. "Cold one, ain't it? What do you want, Garrett? Now is that any way to greet the law?" Garrett clicked his tongue in mock disappointment. "I'm just here to check on my prisoner, make sure she's settling in all right, adjusting to domestic life." "She ain't your prisoner anymore. You released her to my custody. That's the end of it. Did I? Garrett's smile didn't waver. See, I've been thinking about that. Thinking maybe I was too hasty, too generous. He leaned forward in his saddle. That woman is accused of murder, Thornton. Poisoned her husband in cold blood, and now she's living under your roof sleeping down the hall from your little girls. That ain't your concern. Oh, but it is. It's very much my concern. Garrett's voice dropped, losing all pretense of friendliness. What kind of marshal would I be if I let a killer run free? What kind of message would that send to the good people of Silverbrook? Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. Get off my land. I don't think I will. Garrett swung down from his horse boots, crunching in the snow. His deputies followed, spreading out slightly flanking positions. See, I've got some questions for Mrs. Weston. Questions she refused to answer back in town. Maybe she'll be more cooperative now that she's had a taste of freedom. She ain't talking to you. That ain't your decision to make. On my property it is. Garrett took a step forward, then another. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at Caleb with eyes that had gone cold and hard. Let me tell you how this is going to go, he said quietly. You're going to put down that rifle. You're going to invite me inside like a civilized man. And you're going to let me have a conversation with the woman you so foolishly claimed yesterday. And if I don't, then things get unpleasant. Garrett's hand drifted toward his holster. You're already on thin ice, Thornton, harboring an accused criminal, interfering with lawful proceedings. I could arrest you right now, throw you in a cell next to whatever's left of her when I'm done. You'd have to shoot me first. That can be arranged. They stood there frozen in the gray morning light. Caleb's finger rested against the trigger guard. Garrett's hand hovered over his gun. The deputies watched, waiting for a signal. Then a voice cut through the tension like a blade. Enough. Clara stood in the doorway behind Caleb. She'd ignored his instructions, of course she had, and now she stepped forward onto the porch, placing herself between him and Garrett. You want to talk to me, Marshal? Fine. Let's talk. But you leave him and those children out of it. Garrett's smile returned, but there was something ugly underneath it now. Something hungry. Mrs. Weston, you're looking better. Almost human again. Can't say the same for you. Caleb grabbed her arm. Clara, get back inside. No. She shook him off without looking away from Garrett. This is between me and him. It's always been between me and him. Ain't that right, Marshal? Garrett's jaw tightened. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. I think you know exactly what I mean. Clara descended one step, then another, until she stood level with Garrett, close enough to touch. You want to ask me questions? Ask them. Right here. Right now. In front of witnesses. Clara, Caleb started. Did you kill your husband? Garrett cut in, ignoring Caleb entirely. His eyes were locked on Clara like a snake watching a mouse. No. The evidence says otherwise. Then the evidence is wrong. We found arsenic in his blood, in his coffee cup, in the sugar bowl you filled every morning. Planted. All of it. Garrett laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. By who ghosts angels? You expect anyone to believe that? I expect you to know exactly who planted it. Clara's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Because you were there that night. You were there, and you know what really happened to Daniel. Something flickered in Garrett's eyes. Just for a second. Just long enough for Caleb to catch it. Fear. You're delusional, Garrett said. Grief and guilt have rotted your mind. Have they? Then why are you so desperate to keep me quiet? Clara stepped closer, and Garrett actually stepped back. Why did you beat me in that cell every day for 6 months? Why did you try to sell me off like livestock instead of putting me on trial? I was being merciful. You were being scared. Clara's voice rose. Because you know if I get in front of a real judge with real lawyers, the truth is going to come out. And the truth ain't going to look good for you, is it, Marshal? Garrett's face went dark with rage. His hand closed around Clara's throat so fast that Caleb barely had time to react. But react, he did. The rifle butt cracked against Garrett's skull with a sound like splitting wood. The marshal staggered sideways, releasing Clara, his hand going to the blood now streaming down his temple. "You son of a—" He reached for his gun. Caleb was faster. He reversed the rifle and leveled it at Garrett's chest before the marshal's fingers touched metal. "Don't," Caleb said quietly. "I've killed men before. Don't think I won't do it again." The deputies had their guns drawn now, but they hesitated, looking between their bleeding boss and the rifle aimed at his heart. "Stand down," Garrett snarled, waving them off. He straightened slowly, blood dripping down the side of his face, his eyes burning with hatred. "This ain't over, Thornton. Not by a long shot. Get off my land. You just assaulted a federal marshal. That's a hanging offense. And you just tried to strangle a woman on my porch. Call it even." Garrett's lips peeled back from his teeth. "You've made a powerful enemy today. Both of you. You think you can hide out here on this little ranch and the world will just forget about you. Think again." He mounted his horse, swaying slightly from the blow to his head. His deputies followed suit, still watching Caleb with nervous eyes. "I'll be back," Garrett said. "With a warrant, with a posse, with whatever it takes." He looked at Clara, and his smile returned thin and vicious. "Enjoy your freedom while it lasts, Mrs. Weston. It won't be long." He wheeled his horse and galloped away, his deputies following. The sound of hoofbeats faded slowly into the winter morning. Caleb didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight. Then his knees buckled. Clara caught him before he hit the ground, her thin arms surprisingly strong as she guided him to sit on the porch steps. "Breathe," she said. "Just breathe." "I'm fine." "You're shaking like a leaf." "So are you." Clara laughed, a short, sharp sound that was mostly hysteria. "We're a pair, ain't we?" Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. She was pale and trembling, her throat already starting to bruise where Garrett had grabbed her, but her eyes were alive in a way they hadn't been yesterday. "What you said back there," he said slowly, "about Garrett being there that night, about him knowing what really happened." Clara's expression shuddered. "I shouldn't have said that." "But you did, and you meant it." She was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed and sat down beside him on the steps close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Daniel was investigating something," she said quietly. "For months before he died, he was staying out late meeting with people, writing letters he wouldn't let me see. I thought—" She stopped, her jaw tightening. "I thought he was having an affair. God help me, that's what I thought." "But he wasn't." "No. He was gathering evidence. Against Victor Harding." Caleb stiffened. Victor Harding, the cattle baron who owned half the territory, including most of the officials in it. "What kind of evidence?" "Land fraud, intimidation, murder." Clara's voice hardened. "Harding's been forcing out homesteaders for years, buying up their claims for pennies after his men terrorize them into leaving. Anyone who won't sell ends up dead or disappeared. And Daniel found proof. Enough to bring Harding down. Enough to send him to prison, him and everyone who's been helping him." Clara looked at Caleb. "Including Marshal Garrett." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "Garrett killed your husband," Caleb said, "to protect Harding. I can't prove it. That's the hell of it. I know what happened, but I can't prove any of it." Clara's hands curled into fists. "That night, the night Daniel died, I heard voices. Loud voices coming from his study. I thought he was arguing with someone, but by the time I came downstairs, he was alone. Alone and sick. So sick, he could barely stand. Poison. Arsenic. It took him 3 days to die." Her voice cracked. 3 days of watching him suffer, watching him waste away, not understanding what was happening. And then Garrett showed up with his deputies and told me I was under arrest for murder. Did you tell anyone about the voices about Daniel's investigation? Who would believe me? Garrett controls the law around here. Harding controls everything else. I tried to tell the judge at my arraignment, but Garrett said I was hysterical with guilt. Said the stress had broken my mind. She laughed bitterly. And everyone believed him, because why would a federal marshal lie? Caleb sat in silence, processing everything she'd told him. It made sense, a horrible, twisted kind of sense. Garrett needed Clara silenced because she knew too much. The public humiliation in the square wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy. Break her spirit, marry her off to some stranger who'd keep her in line, and the secret dies with her. Except he'd intervened. Except his daughters had pointed at her and said, "That's her." The evidence Daniel gathered, Caleb said slowly. Where is it? Clara shook her head. Gone. Garrett tore the house apart after Daniel died. If there was anything left, he found it. You don't know that for certain. I know Garrett. He's thorough. He wouldn't leave loose ends. Maybe. Caleb stood, his mind racing. Or maybe he didn't find everything. Maybe Daniel was smarter than that. Clara looked up at him, hope and skepticism wearing in her expression. What are you thinking? I'm thinking your husband was investigating dangerous men for months. I'm thinking a man that careful wouldn't keep all his evidence in one place. He held out his hand to help her up. I'm thinking we need to find out what Daniel Weston was really working on, and who else knew about it. Clara stared at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it. You understand what you're getting into, she said as he pulled her to her feet. This ain't just about me anymore. If you start digging into Harding's business, you'll be putting a target on your back, on your girls' backs. There's already a target on our backs. Garrett made sure of that the moment I took you from that square. Then why keep fighting? You could still hand me over. Tell him you made a mistake. He'd probably let you off with a warning. Caleb thought about it. He really did. Thought about his daughters, about the danger, about all the sensible reasons to walk away. Then he thought about Clara standing in that square, bleeding but unbowed. Thought about his girls singing that old song while Clara mouthed the words like a prayer. Thought about Maggie and how she'd died alone in the snow because he wasn't there to save her. He wasn't going to let that happen again. I don't walk away, he said simply. Not from things that matter. Clara's eyes went bright with tears she refused to shed. You're going to get yourself killed, she said. Probably, but not today. He turned toward the house. Come on, let's check on the girls, and then you're going to tell me everything you know about Victor Harding. They walked inside together, and if Caleb's hand brushed against Clara's as they crossed the threshold, neither of them mentioned it. The twins were huddled at the top of the stairs, their faces pale with fear that transformed into relief the moment they saw Clara and their father. Papa, they came thundering down, throwing themselves at his legs. We heard shouting. We heard, it's okay. Caleb knelt and gathered them close. Everything's okay. The bad men are gone. Are they coming back? Rose whispered. Caleb looked at Clara over his daughters' heads. She was watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read, longing maybe, or grief for something she'd never had. They might, he said honestly. But we're going to be ready for them, all of us together. Lily pulled back and looked up at him with serious eyes. We're not going to let them take Clara away, are we, Papa? No, sweetheart, we're not. Promise? Caleb hesitated. Promises were dangerous things. Promises to children even more so. But Clara was watching him. His daughters were watching him. And somewhere in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 18 months cracked open just a little bit wider. I promise, he said. Lily nodded, satisfied. Then she wriggled out of his arms and ran to Clara, grabbing her hand. Come on, she said. You have to see the horses. Papa has the best horses in the whole territory. Rose and I are learning to ride. Maybe you can learn too. Clara looked down at the small hand clutching hers. When she looked back up, her eyes were wet. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd like that very much. They spent the rest of the morning in the barn, the twins showing Clara every horse, explaining their names and personalities with the passionate expertise of children who'd grown up around animals. Caleb watched from the doorway, ostensibly checking equipment, but really just observing the woman his daughters had claimed as their own. She was good with them, patient, gentle. She listened to their chatter with genuine attention, asked questions that made them light up, laughed at their jokes even when they weren't funny. And slowly, gradually, she started to relax. The tension drained from her shoulders. The shadows behind her eyes faded just a little. When Lily demanded that Clara help brush down the gentlest mare, Clara complied with hands that had finally stopped shaking. "She's beautiful," Clara murmured, running the brush along the mare's golden flank. "What's her name?" "Honey," Rose announced proudly. "Because she's sweet like honey." "And because she's the same color," Lily added. Clara smiled a real smile, the first one Caleb had seen from her. It transformed her face, softening the hard edges, revealing the woman she must have been before grief and fear wore her down to bone. She's beautiful, Caleb thought, then immediately pushed the thought away. She was in his protection, under his roof. It wasn't appropriate to think of her as anything other than a guest, even if part of him wanted to. "Papa, can Clara stay forever?" Lily asked suddenly, looking up from where she was attempting to braid Honey's mane. "That's up to Clara, sweetheart. But if she wants to, she can. You won't make her leave." Caleb met Clara's eyes across the stall. She looked startled by the question, uncertain, like she still couldn't quite believe any of this was real. "If she wants to stay," he said carefully, "she's welcome as long as she likes." Clara's breath caught. She looked away quickly, busying herself with the brush, but not before he saw the emotion that flickered across her face. Hope. Fragile, terrified hope. "I think," Clara said quietly, "that I'd like to stay for a while. If that's all right." "Yes." The twins shouted in unison, nearly startling the mare. "That's more than all right," Caleb said. Their eyes met again. Something passed between them, understanding maybe, or the beginning of trust. Or something else entirely. Whatever it was, neither of them was ready to name it yet. But it was there, growing in the spaces between words, taking root in shared glances and accidental touches, and the way Clara smiled when the twins made her laugh. It was there, and Caleb had a feeling it wasn't going away anytime soon. The rest of the day passed quietly. Caleb worked with the horses while Clara helped the twins with their reading. She was educated. He discovered more than most women out here, and she had a gift for explaining things in ways that made the girls' eyes light up with understanding. They ate supper together. The four of them crowded around the small kitchen table, and for the first time in 18 months, the silence in the house felt comfortable rather than oppressive. The twins fell asleep early, exhausted by the excitement of the day. Caleb carried them up to bed one at a time, tucking them in pressing kisses to their foreheads. "Papa?" Rose murmured as he was about to leave. "Yes, sweetheart." "I'm glad we found her, the snow lady." Her eyes were already closing. "I think Mama would be glad too." Caleb's throat tightened. "I think you're right, baby girl." He closed the door softly and stood in the hallway for a moment, collecting himself. When he came back downstairs, Clara was standing at the window, staring out at the darkness. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Haven't slept properly in 6 months." She didn't turn around. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that cell, feel those walls closing in. It'll get better, with time." "Will it?" She turned then, and he saw the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "Garrett's not going to stop. Harding's not going to stop. They'll keep coming until they get what they want. Then we'll keep fighting until they don't." Clara shook her head slowly. "You don't understand. These men, they own this territory. They own the law, the judges, half the people who live here. What chance do we have against that?" Caleb crossed to her, stopping close enough to see the fear she was trying to hide. "We have the truth," he said. "We have whatever evidence your husband gathered, and we have each other. That's not much. It's more than you had yesterday. Clara stared at him. Her eyes searched his face, looking for something, doubt maybe, or deception. She didn't find it. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Really? And don't tell me it's because your daughters believe I saved them. That's not enough reason for a man to risk everything he has." Caleb thought about the question. Really thought about it the way he hadn't let himself think since he first saw her in that square. "You want the truth?" he said finally. "Always. I spent 5 years in the cavalry watching powerful men destroy innocent people because they could. I watched them burn villages, murder families, take whatever they wanted, and call it manifest destiny." His voice hardened. "I swore when I left that I'd never stand by and watch it happen again. Not if there was anything I could do to stop it." Clara's breath caught. "And when I saw you in that square," Caleb continued, "standing there with your head high while they tried to break you, I saw every person I couldn't save. Every injustice I couldn't stop." He met her eyes. "You asked why I'm doing this. That's why. Because I couldn't live with myself if I walked away." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara reached out and laid her hand on his chest, right over his heart. "You're a good man, Caleb Thornton," she said softly. "Better than I deserve. You deserve better than you've gotten. That's the problem." "Maybe." Her hand lingered for just a moment longer. Then she pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold. "I should try to sleep. We've got a lot of work to do tomorrow." "We do." She started toward the stairs, then paused at the bottom step. "Caleb." "Yeah. Thank you for everything, for believing me, for fighting for me." She looked back over her shoulder, and in the dim lamplight, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I won't forget it. Whatever happens next, I won't forget." "Nothing's going to happen," he said. "Not to you. Not while I'm breathing." Clara smiled, sad, grateful, something else he couldn't name. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Clara." She disappeared up the stairs. A moment later, he heard her door close softly. Caleb stood alone in the parlor, his heart beating too fast, his mind spinning with everything that had happened in the last 2 days. Garrett would be back. That was certain. And when he came, there would be a reckoning. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, his house was warm. His daughters were safe. And somewhere upstairs, a woman who'd been fighting alone for far too long was finally learning that she didn't have to anymore. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Caleb banked the fire and headed upstairs. Tomorrow they'd start searching for Daniel Weston's evidence. Tomorrow they'd start building a case against Garrett and Harding. Tomorrow the real fight would begin. But tonight, just for tonight, he let himself believe that everything might actually be okay. He fell asleep to the sound of the wind outside his window and dreamed of a woman with dark hair and fierce eyes who refused to break no matter how hard the world tried. The fever came without warning 3 days later. Caleb woke to the sound of crying, small, frightened sobs that cut through the darkness like a knife. He was out of bed and down the hall before he was fully awake, his heart hammering against his ribs. Lily sat up in bed, her face flushed and damp with sweat. Rose lay beside her, shivering violently, despite the heavy quilts piled on top of them. "Papa." Lily's voice came out thin and reedy. "Rose won't wake up. I tried to wake her, but she won't." Caleb pressed his hand to Rose's forehead and felt the heat radiating off her skin. Too hot, dangerously hot. "Rose, sweetheart, can you hear me?" Rose's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Cold," she whispered. "So cold, Papa. Where's the blanket? Where's the lady's blanket?" Ice slid down Caleb's spine. "What did you say?" "The red blanket." Rose's teeth chattered. "She gave it to us, the snow lady. She was singing about the river." Clara appeared in the doorway, her hair loose and wild, her face tight with worry. "What's happening?" "Fever. Both of them, I think." Caleb scooped Rose into his arms. "Lily, how do you feel?" "My head hurts." Lily pressed her hand to her temple. "And everything's spinning." Clara was already moving, crossing to the bed, pressing her palm to Lily's forehead. "She's burning up too. We need cold water, cloths, something to bring the fever down." "There's a well out back. Buckets by the I know. I'll get it." Clara touched his arm as she passed. "Keep them calm. Talk to them. Don't let them slip away." She was gone before he could respond, her footsteps pounding down the stairs. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, cradling Rose against his chest, while Lily curled into his side. Both girls were shaking now, their small bodies racked with chills, despite the fever burning inside them. "Papa, I'm scared," Lily whispered. "I know, baby. I know. But you're going to be okay. Clara's getting water to cool you down, and then—" "The snow," Rose mumbled, her eyes rolling. "So much snow. Mama's not moving. Why isn't Mama moving?" Caleb's blood went cold. They were remembering. The fever was pulling memories to the surface, memories of that terrible night 2 years ago when they'd nearly died. "We have to stay warm," Lily moaned, picking up her sister's thread like they were sharing the same dream. "Have to hold on. The lady said help was coming." "She promised," Rose whispered. "She promised help was coming." Clara burst back through the door, a bucket of water sloshing in her hands. Cloths draped over her arm. She took one look at the girls' faces and froze. "They're talking about that night," Caleb said hoarsely. "The blizzard. They're reliving it." Clara set down the bucket and knelt beside the bed, wringing out a cloth and pressing it to Rose's burning forehead. "Talk to me, sweetheart. Tell me what you remember." "The stars are so pretty," Rose mumbled. "She's singing about the stars. Don't stop singing. Please don't stop." Clara's hand stilled on the cloth. Her face went white. "What song?" she whispered. "What was she singing? The river and the mountain?" Lily answered, her voice dreamy and distant. "Finding your way home even when you're lost." Clara made a choked sound. "You know it," Caleb said. "You remember." "My grandmother's song." Clara's voice shook. "She used to sing it to me when I was scared. I don't even remember all the words anymore." "The blanket's red," Rose murmured. "Soft and red and warm. But she's shaking. Why is she shaking?" "She gave us the blanket," Lily said. "She's not wearing it anymore. She gave it to us." Clara's hands trembled as she continued bathing the girls' foreheads. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't stop working. "I remember," she whispered suddenly. "Oh God, I remember." "Clara. The storm. I was traveling to the next town. The blizzard came out of nowhere." Her words tumbled out faster and faster. "I took shelter under a tree, and then I heard crying. Children crying. I followed the sound and found them 2 little girls huddled together next to an overturned wagon, next to a woman who wasn't moving." She looked at Caleb, her eyes wild with recognition. "I knew she was dead. Their mama. I knew she was dead, and I knew they'd die too if I didn't do something." "What did you do?" "I only had one blanket. My grandmother's blanket. I wrapped them up as tight as I could." Clara's voice broke. "I sang to them because I didn't know what else to do. Because they were so scared and I needed them to stay calm." "How long did you stay?" "Hours. Until I couldn't feel my hands anymore. Couldn't feel my feet." She pressed her fist to her mouth. "The last thing I remember is lying down next to them, trying to keep them warm with my body. And then nothing. I woke up 3 days later in someone's barn, half dead from exposure." "You gave everything," Caleb said quietly. "You nearly died saving 2 children you'd never met." "I thought I'd imagined it. Thought the cold had made me hallucinate." Clara looked at the twins, at their fevered faces, at their small hands clutching the blankets. But they're real. They survived, because I—" She couldn't finish. Caleb reached across and took her hand. "Because you loved them. Even though you didn't know them. Even though you had no reason to. You loved them enough to freeze." Clara sobbed great heaving cries that shook her whole body. But she didn't stop working. Didn't stop pressing cool cloths to burning foreheads. Didn't stop murmuring reassurances to the girls who were slowly, gradually beginning to calm. They worked through the night together, taking turns with the water in the cloths, singing snatches of the old song when the girls cried out, holding each other up when exhaustion threatened to drag them down. Somewhere around dawn, the fevers broke. Lily opened her eyes first, clear and focused. "Papa? What happened?" "You were sick, baby girl, but you're going to be okay now." Rose stirred beside her, reaching out until her small hand found Clara's. "You stayed with us, like before." Clara's breath caught. "Of course I stayed. Where else would I be?" "In the snow." Rose's voice was serious, ancient. "You stayed with us in the snow even when you were so cold. Even when you didn't have your blanket anymore. You remember that? We always remembered." Lily sat up slowly, her eyes on Clara's tear-stained face. "But people said we dreamed it. The doctor said it wasn't real." "It was real," Clara whispered. "I promise you it was real. I was there. I was there." "We know," the twins said together, and reached for her with small, certain hands. Clara gathered them close and cried. Not the broken sobs of before, but something cleaner, relief and wonder, and a love that had survived 2 years of forgetting. Caleb backed out of the room quietly, giving them space. He stood in the hallway and let himself breathe for the first time in hours. His daughters were alive, Clara remembered. And somehow, impossibly, the three of them had found each other again. He walked downstairs on shaking legs and collapsed into the chair by the cold fireplace. The morning sun was starting to creep through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and pink. What were the odds? What were the chances that the woman his daughters had pointed to in that square, the woman accused of murder, beaten and bound and offered up like livestock, was the same woman who'd saved their lives 2 years ago? It felt like fate, like providence, like something bigger than any of them was at work, weaving threads together that should never have connected. Caleb put his head in his hands and let himself feel it all. The fear, the relief, the overwhelming gratitude. And underneath it all, something else. Something that had been growing quietly since the moment Clara Weston had looked at him with those fierce, exhausted eyes and asked, "Why would you do this?" He was falling for her. It was too soon. It was inappropriate. It was complicated beyond measure, but it was true. He heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to find Clara standing in the parlor doorway. She looked exhausted, wrung out, but there was something different in her expression now, something lighter. "Girls are asleep," she said quietly. "Really asleep this time. No fever dreams." "Good, that's good." Clara crossed to where he sat and lowered herself onto the ottoman in front of him. Their knees almost touched. Close enough that he could smell the soap on her skin, see the freckles scattered across her nose. "I remember everything now," she said. "The whole night. Finding them, keeping them warm the moment I thought we were all going to die together. You saved them. And they saved me." Her voice cracked. "When you cut me down from that post, when they said that's her, they gave me my life back. They gave me a reason to keep fighting." Caleb reached out and took her hand. It felt natural now. "Right. We owed you a debt we didn't even know about," he said. "And then you show up beaten half to death, accused of murder, and my daughters recognize you like you're something out of a fairy tale. This isn't a fairy tale. No. It's better." He squeezed her fingers. "Fairy tales are made up. This is real. You're real. And whatever happens next, whatever Garrett tries to do, you're not facing it alone anymore." Clara stared at him for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. They stayed like that, breathing each other's air, their hands intertwined between them. Not a kiss, not yet, but something just as intimate, something that felt like a promise. "I'm scared," Clara whispered against his skin. "Me too." This could go wrong in 1,000 different ways. "I know. Garrett won't stop. Harding won't stop. They'll burn this place down before they let us win. Then we'll rebuild." Caleb pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Clara, I've lost everything once. My wife, my hope, the part of myself that believed in anything good. I'm not losing again. Not you, not the girls, not whatever this is that's growing between us." Clara's breath caught. Clara's breath. "What is this?" she asked. "Between us? I don't know yet, but I want to find out." He released one of her hands and cupped her face gently. "When you're ready, when all this is over, I want to find out what we could be." Clara closed her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek and onto his thumb. "I haven't let myself want anything in so long," she said. "It was too dangerous, too painful. But with you—" She stopped. "With me? What?" "With you, I want to try." Caleb's heart stuttered in his chest. He wanted to kiss her. God, he wanted to kiss her so badly it hurt. But not like this. Not when she was exhausted and emotional and still processing memories that had been buried for 2 years. Instead, he pressed his lips to her forehead, soft, reverent, a seal on words they hadn't spoken yet. "When this is over," he promised. "When you're free of Garrett and Harding and all of it. I'm going to court you properly, Clara Weston, the way you deserve." Clara laughed, a wet, broken sound that was somehow also full of joy. "Court me? Who even says that anymore?" "I do, and I mean it." He pulled back and met her eyes. "You deserve someone who's willing to wait, who's willing to do things right. That's what I'm offering. And if I don't want to wait—" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Caleb's resolve wavered. He was only human after all, and she was looking at him like he was the only solid thing in a shifting world. But he held firm. "Then I'll still wait," he said quietly. "Because you're worth waiting for." Clara stared at him like he'd just handed her the moon. "You really are something else, Caleb Thornton." "So I've been told." They sat together in the growing morning light, hands, intertwined foreheads, close breathing in sync. Outside, the world waited, with all its dangers and uncertainties. Garrett was still out there. Harding was still pulling strings. The evidence they needed to bring them down was still missing. But in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the woman beside him finally letting herself believe she might be safe. What mattered was the 2 little girls upstairs sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. What mattered was the family they were building piece by fragile piece out of grief and hope, and the kind of love that didn't ask for anything in return. A sound broke the silence, a rider approaching fast. Caleb was on his feet in an instant, reaching for the rifle. But Clara grabbed his arm. "Wait, listen." The hoofbeats were wrong. Not the heavy thunder of multiple riders, but a single horse pushing hard like someone was running toward them instead of hunting them. Caleb moved to the window and looked out. A lone rider was dismounting in front of the house. A man in a travel-worn coat, tall and lean with dark hair going gray at the temples. He looked up at the house, and Caleb saw his face clearly. The same dark eyes as Clara. The same stubborn jaw. "Oh my God!" Clara breathed behind him. Caleb turned. She was standing frozen in the middle of the parlor, one hand pressed to her heart, her face white as snow. "Clara, who is that?" Clara's voice came out barely above a whisper. "My brother. That's my brother Samuel." Before Caleb could respond, Clara was running out the door down the porch steps across the frozen yard. The man caught her in his arms and held on like he'd never let go. Caleb watched from the doorway as brother and sister clung to each other in the pale morning light. He could hear Clara crying, hear the man murmuring words too low to make out. Then the man looked up, his eyes finding Caleb's across the distance. And in that look, Caleb saw something that made his heart stop. Hope. Fierce, desperate, impossible hope. Samuel Weston had come to Silverbrook, and he hadn't come empty-handed. Samuel Weston held his sister like a man who'd been drowning for months and finally found solid ground. "I thought you were dead," he said into her hair, his voice cracking on the words. "When I heard about Daniel, when they said you'd been arrested, I came as fast as I could, but by the time I got here, they told me you were gone. Escaped, they said. Vanished." "I didn't escape." Clara pulled back just enough to look at his face. "A man cut me down from a post in the town square and took me home." Samuel's eyes found Caleb again, still standing in the doorway. "That man, his name is Caleb Thornton, and he saved my life." Samuel released his sister and crossed the frozen yard. Caleb stepped down from the porch to meet him halfway. "Mr. Thornton?" Samuel extended his hand. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." Caleb shook it firmly. "You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone with sense would have done." "No." Samuel's grip tightened. "You didn't. I talked to people in town before I rode out here. I know what they're saying about my sister. I know what Garrett's been telling everyone." His jaw hardened. "Most men would have walked away. You didn't. Your sister saved my daughters once. Seemed only right to return the favor." Something flickered across Samuel's face. Surprise, confusion, then dawning recognition. "The blizzard," he said slowly. 2 years ago. Clara told me about finding children in the snow, but she said she thought she'd imagined it. She didn't imagine it. My girls remember everything." Samuel looked at Clara, then back at Caleb. "This is either the strangest coincidence I've ever heard, or something bigger than any of us is at work here." "I stopped believing in coincidences a long time ago," Caleb said. "Come inside. It's cold, and I'm guessing you didn't ride all the way from Denver just to stand in my yard." They went inside. Clara made coffee while Samuel shed his coat and warmed his hands by the fire Caleb was building back up. The twins were still asleep upstairs, exhausted from the night's fever, which was probably for the best. This conversation was going to be complicated. "How did you find her?" Caleb asked, settling into the chair across from Samuel. "I'm a journalist with the Denver Chronicle. When I heard about Daniel's death and Clara's arrest, I started investigating." Samuel accepted the coffee cup Clara pressed into his hands. "The official story didn't make sense. Daniel was a careful man, methodical. He wouldn't have been stupid enough to eat or drink something his own wife had poisoned." "He was investigating Victor Harding," Clara said quietly. "That's what got him killed." "I know." Samuel set down his cup and reached into his coat. "I know because I've been continuing his work for the past 6 months." He pulled out a leather satchel and laid it on the table. Inside were stacks of papers, letters what looked like ledger pages covered in cramped handwriting. "Daniel was smart," Samuel said. "He knew Harding would come for him eventually, so he didn't keep all his evidence in one place. He sent copies to me, hidden in ordinary letters. And he sent more to people he trusted, a lawyer in Helena, a banker in San Francisco, a newspaper editor in Chicago." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "He never told me. He was protecting you. If you didn't know where the evidence was, you couldn't tell anyone no matter what they did to you." Samuel's voice hardened. He underestimated how far Garrett would go. He thought they'd just kill him and move on. He didn't expect them to frame you. Caleb leaned forward. "What kind of evidence are we talking about?" "Everything. Land deeds with forged signatures, bank records showing payments from Harding to Garrett and half the officials in the territory, witness statements from ranchers who were forced off their land." Samuel pulled a small wooden box from the bottom of the satchel. "And this?" He opened the box to reveal a strange contraption. Brass fittings, a hand crank, what looked like a wax cylinder inside. "What is that?" Clara asked. "A recording device, new technology from back east. Daniel used it to record testimony from a witness who was too scared to sign a statement." Samuel's eyes met Caleb's. A witness who saw Garrett entering the Weston house the night Daniel died, who saw him leaving 3 hours later with blood on his coat. The room went silent. Clara's face had gone white. Garrett killed him. Garrett killed Daniel himself. That's what the witness says, and there's more. Samuel turned the crank on the device adjusting something. Daniel recorded himself too, made a statement 3 days before he died just in case. He activated the mechanism, and suddenly Daniel Weston's voice filled the room. "My name is Daniel Weston. I'm recording this on September 15th, 1882. If you're hearing this, something's happened to me, and you need to know the truth." Clara made a choked sound. Caleb reached over and took her hand. "Marshal Wade Garrett is on Victor Harding's payroll. He's been helping Harding steal land from homesteaders for years. Anyone who won't sell ends up dead or disappeared. I have evidence bank records, witness statements enough to bring them both down." The recording crackled and popped. "Garrett knows I'm close. He's been threatening me for weeks. Told me if I don't drop the investigation, he'll make sure my wife pays the price." Daniel's voice hardened. "I'm not stopping. The people of this territory deserve to know what's been done to them. But if I end up dead, don't believe whatever story Garrett tells. And for God's sake, protect Clara. She doesn't know anything about this. I kept her in the dark on purpose. If something happens to me, she's innocent. Remember that." The recording ended with a sharp click. Clara was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. "He died protecting me," she whispered. "He kept me ignorant so I couldn't be blamed, and they blamed me anyway. But now we can clear your name." Samuel gathered the papers back into the satchel. "This evidence is enough to bring Garrett and Harding down, enough to prove you're innocent. All we need is a forum to present it." "The town meeting," Caleb said suddenly. "Garrett's been threatening to call a town meeting to decide Clara's fate, turn this town against us, get enough support to take her by force. When? He didn't say, but soon. He's getting desperate. I cracked his skull when he tried to strangle Clara on my porch. He won't wait long for payback." Samuel's expression flickered with surprise, then respect. "You hit a federal marshal." He had his hands on her throat. Seemed like the appropriate response. "Mr. Thornton, I think I'm going to like you very much." Samuel stood and began pacing. "Here's what I'm thinking. We let Garrett call his meeting. Let him gather the whole town. And then we walk in with this evidence and blow his story to pieces in front of everyone." "It's risky," Clara said. "If it doesn't work, then we're no worse off than we already are." Caleb stood too, his mind racing. "Right now, everyone in Silverbrook thinks you're guilty. They've heard Garrett's version for months. If we try to fight this in secret through lawyers and courts, Harding will find out and shut us down before we get started. But if we do it public," Samuel continued, "in front of witnesses who can see and hear for themselves, then Garrett can't bury it, can't claim we fabricated evidence." Caleb nodded slowly. "It's our best shot." Clara looked between them. "You're talking about walking into a room full of people who want me dead and gambling everything on them changing their minds. I'm talking about giving them the truth," Samuel said. "People aren't stupid, Clara. They've been lied to, manipulated, scared into compliance. But when they hear Daniel's voice, when they see the evidence with their own eyes, they might surprise you," Caleb finished. "Or they might not, but at least we'll have tried." Clara was silent for a long moment. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were steady. "All right," she said finally. "All right. We do it your way. But I want to be the one to face them. I want to stand up there and look every single person in the eye when the truth comes out." "Clara," Caleb started. "No." Her voice hardened. "I've spent 6 months hiding, running, letting other people fight my battles. Not anymore. This is my husband's legacy. My name they've dragged through the mud. My life they've tried to destroy." She lifted her chin. "I'll be the one to end it." Caleb looked at her, This woman who'd been beaten, starved, humiliated, who'd lost everything, and somehow refused to break, and felt his heart crack open just a little bit wider. "Together," he said quietly. "We do it together." Clara met his eyes. "Together." Samuel watched this exchange with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. Curiosity, maybe, or understanding. "Well," Samuel said finally, "looks like we've got work to do." They spent the rest of the morning planning. Samuel laid out all the evidence, organizing it into a presentation that would be impossible to dismiss. Caleb mapped out the town hall, identifying exits and potential ambush points. Clara practiced what she would say, running through the story again and again until the words came out smooth and steady. The twins woke around noon, their fevers fully broken, confused and delighted to find a stranger in the house. "Who are you?" Lily demanded, planting herself in front of Samuel with her hands on her hips. "I'm Clara's brother. My name's Samuel." "Clara's our mama now," Rose announced proudly. "Papa saved her, and now she lives with us." Samuel's eyebrows rose. "Your mama?" "She saved us first," Lily explained. "In the snow. 2 whole years ago, and now we saved her back." Samuel looked at Clara, who was trying very hard not to cry again. "Seems like you've got yourself a family little sister." "Seems like I do." The children accepted Samuel's presence with the easy trust of youth, peppering him with questions about his job, his travels, whether he'd ever met any famous outlaws. Samuel answered with patience and humor, and Caleb found himself warming to the man, despite his initial wariness. By evening, they had a plan. Garrett would come eventually to issue his summons to make his demands to drag Clara back to face judgment. When he did, they would comply. Go willingly to the town meeting. Let Garrett think he'd won. And then they would destroy him. The knock on the door came 3 days later. Caleb had been expecting it. He'd spent the days in between reinforcing the house, teaching Clara to shoot, making sure the twins knew exactly what to do if trouble came. Samuel had ridden to the neighboring ranches, quietly spreading word of what was really happening, building support among the people Harding hadn't yet corrupted. When Caleb opened the door, Garrett stood on the porch with 4 deputies behind him. His head was still bandaged from where Caleb had hit him, and his smile was tight with barely concealed rage. "Thornton, I'm here to inform you that a town meeting has been called for tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock, Town Hall. What's the purpose of this meeting?" "To discuss the safety concerns regarding your house guest." Garrett's eyes flicked past Caleb to where Clara stood in the hallway. "The good people of Silverbrook have a right to know who's living among them. And if we don't attend," Garrett's smile widened, "then I'll be forced to interpret your absence as an admission of guilt, and I'll have no choice but to come back here with a warrant and a posse." He leaned in close. "This is your one chance to do this, civilized Thornton. I suggest you take it." Caleb held his gaze without flinching. "We'll be there." "Good." Garrett stepped back, signaling to his deputies. "Oh, and Mrs. Weston." He looked past Caleb again. "I'd say my prayers tonight if I were you. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He turned and walked away, his men following. Caleb stood in the doorway and watched until they disappeared down the road. Clara's hand found his. "This is it," she said quietly. "Tomorrow, one way or another, it ends." "You ready?" "No." She squeezed his fingers. "But I'm going to do it anyway." Caleb turned to face her. She looked scared. Of course she was scared, only a fool wouldn't be, but underneath the fear he saw something else. Steel. Resolve. The same fire he'd seen in her eyes that first day in the square. "I'm going to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to hear it, really hear it before tomorrow." Clara's breath caught. "What?" "Whatever happens in that meeting, whatever they say or do, you are not what they've made you. You are not the murderer in Garrett's stories. You are not the broken woman they dragged through the streets." He cupped her face in his hands. You are the woman who gave her last blanket to save 2 children she'd never met. You are the woman who survived 6 months of hell and came out fighting. You are Clara Weston, and you are worth every single risk I've taken." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I love you," Caleb said. "I know it's too soon. I know we haven't had time to do this right. But I'm saying it now because tomorrow isn't promised, and I'll be damned if I go into that meeting without telling you the truth." Clara made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You're crazy," she whispered. "Absolutely out of your mind." "Probably. Does that change your answer?" "I haven't given an answer yet." "Then give me one." Clara stared at him for a long, breathless moment. Then she rose up on her toes and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was desperate and fierce, and tasted like tears, and Caleb pulled her close and kissed her back like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara pressed her forehead to his. "I love you too," she said. "God help me, I love you too." Caleb laughed, a sound of pure, unexpected joy. "God help us both." They stood there in the hallway holding each other, letting the moment stretch out as long as it could. Tomorrow would bring danger and uncertainty, and the very real possibility that everything would fall apart. But tonight, just for tonight, they had this. And it was enough. The morning of the meeting dawned cold and gray. Caleb dressed in his best clothes, the same suit he'd worn to Maggie's funeral, the same suit he'd thought he'd never wear again. Clara wore the blue dress that had belonged to his wife, her dark hair braided and pinned up, looking every inch the respectable woman she'd always been. Samuel had returned in the night, having successfully rallied support from 3 neighboring ranches. 12 men had promised to attend the meeting to stand as witnesses if nothing else. It wasn't an army, but it was something. The twins were staying with Helen Crawford, the widow who owned the boarding house in town. She'd been one of the few people who'd shown Clara kindness during her imprisonment, sneaking her food when Garrett wasn't looking. Caleb trusted her as much as he trusted anyone. "You be good for Mrs. Crawford," he told the girls as they prepared to leave. "Mind your manners and don't cause trouble." "We want to come with you," Lily protested. "We want to help Clara." "You are helping. By being safe, by being brave, you're helping more than you know." Rose threw her arms around his neck. "Come back to us, Papa. Promise you'll come back." Caleb held her tight. "I promise, baby girl. I promise." He kissed them both and handed them off to Helen, who'd arrived with her wagon just after dawn. The old woman looked at Clara with sharp, knowing eyes. "You give 'em hell," she said quietly. "Garrett's had this town under his thumb for too long. Time someone stood up." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The ride into Silverbrook felt longer than usual. Samuel rode beside them, the satchel of evidence secured inside his coat. Nobody spoke. There was nothing left to say. The town hall was already crowded when they arrived. Half of Silverbrook had turned out, drawn by curiosity or bloodlust or the simple desire to watch drama unfold. Caleb saw faces he recognized, the storekeeper, the blacksmith families he'd done business with for years. Most of them avoided his eyes. Garrett stood at the front of the hall, flanked by his deputies, looking like a cat who'd cornered a mouse. When he saw them enter, his smile was triumphant. "Glad you could make it," he called out. "Come on up front, don't be shy." Caleb led the way down the center aisle, Clara at his side, Samuel behind them. He could feel every eye on his back, hear the whispers spreading like wildfire. They reached the front and stopped. Clara stood tall, her chin lifted, meeting the stares of her accusers without flinching. "Well then," Garrett said, stepping onto the raised platform. "Let's get started, shall we?" He launched into his accusations, the same lies he'd been telling for months, dressed up in legal language and righteous indignation. Clara Weston, murderer. Clara Weston, danger to the community. Clara Weston, who'd poisoned her own husband and shown no remorse. The crowd muttered and shifted. Caleb saw heads nodding, faces hardening against Clara. Then Garrett made his mistake. "And now," he announced, "this woman's been living under Caleb Thornton's roof, sleeping down the hall from his innocent daughters. Who knows what kind of influence she's had on those children? Who knows what?" "That's enough." Clara's voice cut through the hall like a blade. Garrett stopped mid-sentence. The crowd went silent. "You've had your say," Clara continued, stepping forward. "Now it's my turn." Garrett's smile didn't waver. "Mrs. Weston, I don't care what you think. You've spent 6 months telling these people who I am. Now I'm going to tell them the truth." She turned to face the crowd. "My name is Clara Weston. My husband Daniel was murdered 6 months ago, and the man who killed him is standing right there on that platform." The hall erupted. Caleb watched Clara raise her voice above the chaos, telling her story. Daniel's investigation, Garrett's threats the night her husband died. She told them about the voices she'd heard about Garrett's appearance at her door, with accusations already formed about the 6 months of beatings and starvation, and demands she cooperate. Some people were shouting, calling her a liar. Others were listening, doubt creeping into their expressions. And then Samuel stepped forward. "My name is Samuel Weston," he announced. "I'm a journalist with the Denver Chronicle, and I've spent 6 months investigating my brother-in-law's death." He opened the satchel and began pulling out papers. "I have bank records showing regular payments from Victor Harding to Marshall Garrett. I have forged land deeds with signatures of homesteaders who were dead before they could have signed them. I have witness statements from a dozen families who were forced off their land at gunpoint." The crowd's murmur grew louder. "And I have this." Samuel held up the recording device. Daniel Weston's own testimony recorded 3 days before he died. He activated the mechanism, and Daniel's voice filled the hall. "If I end up dead, don't believe whatever story Garrett tells. And for God's sake, protect Clara. She doesn't know anything about this. I kept her in the dark on purpose. If something happens to me, she's innocent. Remember that." The silence that followed was absolute. Caleb watched the crowd's faces transform, confusion giving way to doubt, doubt giving way to anger. But not anger at Clara. Anger at Garrett. "That's a lie," Garrett snarled, lunging for the device. "That's a fabrication, Then explain this." Samuel pulled out one final document. "A statement from one of your own men, a deputy who saw you enter the Weston house the night Daniel died, who saw you leave 3 hours later with blood on your coat." Garrett's face went white. "He's lying. They're all lying. This is a conspiracy, No." The voice came from the crowd. Deputy Tom Reed pushed forward, his face pale but determined. "It ain't a lie. I was there that night. I saw everything." The hall exploded. Garrett went for his gun, but Caleb was faster. He tackled the marshal before he could draw, slamming him to the ground. Deputies converged from both sides, some trying to help Garrett, others moving to restrain him. In the chaos, Caleb heard voices rising. "Arrest him. He killed Daniel Weston. She's innocent. She was innocent all along." And above it all, Clara's voice, steady and clear. "I told you the truth. Now you know." It was over. Garrett was dragged away in chains, still screaming about conspiracies and frame-ups. Victor Harding would be arrested within the week Samuel promised once the evidence reached the territorial governor. Clara stood in the middle of the town hall, surrounded by people who'd condemned her just hours ago, and let herself breathe for the first time in 6 months. "Mrs. Weston." Helen Crawford pushed through the crowd, tears on her weathered cheeks. "Mrs. Weston, I'm so sorry. We should have—" "It's over," Clara said quietly. "That's all that matters now." Caleb found her in the chaos and pulled her close. She buried her face against his chest and let him hold her while the world rearranged itself around them. "You did it," he murmured into her hair. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected. "Together." Caleb smiled and held her tighter. Together. He was starting to like that word. The weeks that followed the town meeting passed like a fever dream. Garrett was transported to Helena to stand trial. Victor Harding was arrested 3 days later, dragged from his grand house in chains, while half the territory watched. The territorial governor launched an investigation that uncovered crimes, stretching back nearly a decade. Forged documents, stolen land. Families destroyed, lives ruined. And through it all, Clara Weston was free. She still couldn't quite believe it. Some mornings, she woke up gasping, certain she was back in that cell. Certain the last few weeks had been nothing but a cruel dream. But then she'd hear the twins laughing downstairs, smell coffee brewing in the kitchen, feel the warmth of quilts that didn't smell like mold and despair. And she'd remember, she was home. "You're thinking too loud," Caleb said one morning, finding her standing at the window with her coffee going cold in her hands. "I can hear it from across the room." Clara smiled without turning around. "Just trying to figure out how I got here." "You walked. I watched you do it." "That's not what I mean." Caleb crossed to her and wrapped his arms around her from behind. She leaned into him automatically now, a habit that had formed without her permission, as natural as breathing. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "I ask myself the same thing every day. How did I end up with this woman in my house? This woman who saved my daughters, who stood up to a corrupt marshal, who somehow managed to steal my heart when I wasn't looking." Clara turned in his arms. "I didn't steal anything. You gave it willingly." "Same difference." She laughed and pressed her forehead to his chest. "You're impossible." "So I've been told." They stood like that for a while, swaying slightly in the pale morning light. The house was quiet around them, the twins still asleep, the world outside muffled by fresh snow. "Samuel's leaving today," Clara said finally. "Back to Denver. He says there's more work to do, more stories to tell." "You okay with that?" "I think so." She pulled back to look at him. "He asked me to come with him. Said there's nothing keeping me here now that I'm free." Caleb's arms tightened around her. "What did you tell him?" "That he was wrong." Clara reached up and touched his face. "That there's everything keeping me here." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Hope, maybe. Or something bigger than hope. "Clara." "I love you," she said. "I know we said it before in the heat of everything, but I need you to know I meant it. I mean it now. I love you, Caleb Thornton. I love your daughters. I love this ranch and this life and the way you look at me like I'm something precious instead of something broken. You were never broken. I am. But you made me believe I could be whole again." She took a breath. "And I want to stay. If you'll have me. I want to build a life here with you, with Lily and Rose. I want to be the family we've been pretending to be." Caleb stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. "If I'll have you, Clara, I've been trying to figure out how to ask you to marry me for 3 weeks. Clara's heart stopped. "What?" "I had a whole speech planned. Very romantic. Something about second chances and new beginnings, and how my daughters were right about you from the very start." He cupped her face in his hands. "But now you've gone and ruined it by saying everything I wanted to say first." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Just say yes." Clara blinked. "You haven't asked me anything yet." "Oh, right." Caleb dropped to one knee, right there in the kitchen, still holding her hands. "Clara Weston, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, the mother my daughters have already chosen for themselves? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you?" Clara was crying. She hadn't even realized she'd started. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Caleb surged to his feet and kissed her deep and thorough and full of promise. Clara kissed him back with everything she had, pouring months of fear and grief and desperate hope into the press of her lips against his. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, she was laughing through her tears. "The girls are going to be insufferable about this. They've been asking when we're getting married since the 2nd week." "Of course they have." As if summoned by the mention of their name, small footsteps thundered down the stairs. Lily burst into the kitchen first. Rose right behind her, both of them skidding to a halt when they saw their father and Clara wrapped in each other's arms. "Are you kissing?" Lily demanded. "We were," Caleb admitted. "Does this mean you're getting married?" Rose asked, her eyes huge and hopeful. Clara knelt down to their level. "Would that be okay with you if I married your papa? If I stayed here forever?" "Forever and ever," Lily pressed. "Forever and ever." Both girls launched themselves at her, nearly knocking her over. Clara caught them and held on tight, tears streaming down her face as they chattered and squealed and made plans for the wedding. "We can wear matching dresses. And carry flowers. And you'll be our real mama now." "I've always been your real mama," Clara said quietly, "since the moment I found you in that snow." The girls went still in her arms. "You remember," Rose whispered. "I remember everything now. I remember finding you. I remember being so scared. I remember thinking that if I could just keep you warm until morning, just keep you alive a little longer, nothing else would matter." "You sang to us," Lily said. "My grandmother's song, about the river and the mountain." "Can you sing it now?" Rose asked. "Please, we never forgot it, but we don't know all the words." Clara looked at Caleb, who was watching them with an expression of such tender love that it made her chest ache. He nodded, so she sang. The old melody filled the kitchen, the words coming back to her piece by piece. It was a song about being lost and finding your way home, about following the river when the path disappeared, about climbing the mountain even when you couldn't see the top. The twins joined in where they remembered their high voices twining around Clara's. And after a moment, Caleb's voice joined, too rough and uncertain, learning the words as he went. By the time the song ended, they were all crying. But they were also smiling, and somehow that felt exactly right. The wedding happened 3 weeks later on a Saturday morning when the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. They held it at the ranch under the bare-branched cottonwoods by the creek. The trees were still winter-stripped, but someone had hung ribbons from the branches, and the sun caught them and made them dance like living things. Half the town came, not because they were invited. Clara hadn't wanted a big wedding, hadn't wanted to face the people who'd condemned her, but because they came anyway. Because they wanted to make amends. Because they needed to witness this moment, this proof that good things could grow from terrible soil. Samuel stood beside Clara, ready to walk her down the makeshift aisle. He'd postponed his return to Denver for this, refusing to miss his sister's wedding, no matter how many stories awaited him back east. "You sure about this?" he asked one last time. Clara looked toward the creek where Caleb waited with the circuit preacher and 2 little girls in white dresses carrying wildflowers. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Then let's go make it official." They walked together through the gathered crowd. Clara wore a dress she'd made herself, ivory cotton, with lace she'd found in the back of Maggie's trunk, repurposed and reimagined into something new. Something that was just hers. Caleb's face when he saw her was worth every stitch. "You're beautiful," he breathed as she reached him. "You're not so bad yourself." The preacher cleared his throat. "If we could begin." The ceremony was simple. No fancy words, no elaborate traditions. Just 2 people who'd found each other against impossible odds, promising to keep finding each other every day for the rest of their lives. When it came time for the vows, Clara spoke from the heart. "I spent so long believing I didn't deserve happiness," she said, her voice carrying in the still morning air. "I believed the world when it told me I was guilty. I believed the people who said I was worth nothing. But you looked at me beaten and broken and accused of murder, and you saw something worth saving. You chose me when everyone else wanted me dead, and I promised to spend the rest of my life earning that choice." Caleb's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I spent 2 years believing I'd never feel anything again," he said. "After Maggie died, I shut down, went through the motions, Told myself that protecting my daughters was enough, that I didn't need anything else. He took her hands. But then you came along and you reminded me what it felt like to hope, to fight, to love someone so much it scares you. I promise to never stop fighting for you, Clara. I promise to never stop choosing you even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife. When Caleb kissed her, the crowd cheered. When the twins threw themselves at both of them, nearly toppling the whole family into the creek, everyone laughed. And when Clara finally pulled back and looked at her new husband, at her new daughters, at the life she'd somehow managed to build from the ashes of everything she'd lost, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real, bone-deep peace. The celebration lasted all afternoon. Helen Crawford had organized food, and half the women in town had contributed dishes until the tables groaned under the weight. Someone produced a fiddle, and suddenly there was dancing impromptu and joyful in the space between the cottonwoods. Clara danced with Caleb until her feet ached. She danced with the twins, swinging them around while they shrieked with laughter. She even danced with Samuel, who was stiff and awkward, but tried his best. "I'm happy for you," he said as they moved through a slow waltz. "Truly. Daniel would be happy too." "I know." Clara had made her peace with Daniel's ghost. He'd died trying to protect her, trying to make the world safer for people like them. She'd honor his memory by living the life he'd wanted for her. "I think he'd like Caleb." "He would. Anyone who could do what Caleb did, stand up to Garrett, risk everything for a stranger, Daniel would have respected that." "He wasn't a stranger." Clara looked across the clearing to where Caleb was teaching Lily and Rose some kind of ridiculous jig. "Not really. Our paths crossed years before either of us knew it. Maybe they were always meant to cross again." "You believe in fate now?" "I believe in something." She smiled. "Call it fate, call it providence, call it two stubborn people too stupid to give up. Whatever it is, I'm grateful for it." Samuel hugged her tight. "Be happy, little sister. You've earned it." "I'll try." He left the next morning for Denver, promising to visit often, to write every week, to be there for the birth of any nieces or nephews who might arrive. Clara watched him ride away, and felt the bittersweetness of it, the ending of one chapter, the beginning of another. Then Lily was tugging at her skirt, demanding breakfast, and Rose was asking about the horses, and Caleb was standing in the doorway with coffee in his hand and love in his eyes. And Clara turned her back on the road and walked into her new life. The seasons changed the way they always did, quick and unforgiving. Winter melted into spring. Spring blazed into summer. Summer faded into fall. Clara learned the rhythms of ranch life. She learned to ride properly, to mend fences, to birth foals, and calm nervous horses. She learned which herbs grew wild near the creek, and which ones could be coaxed from the garden she planted behind the house. She learned to braid hair and bake bread, and tell bedtime stories that made two little girls laugh until they couldn't breathe. And she learned to be happy. Not the desperate, grasping kind of happiness she'd known before, the kind that came with conditions and requirements and the constant fear of losing it. This happiness was quieter, steadier. It lived in the small moments: Caleb's hand finding hers across the breakfast table, Lily's proud grin when she finally mastered a difficult word, Rose's drawings that covered every available surface in the house. It lived in the nights she spent wrapped in her husband's arms, talking about everything and nothing, planning futures they finally believed they might actually have. It lived in the community that slowly, cautiously opened itself back up to her. The women who stopped by with casseroles and gossip. The men who tipped their hats and called her ma'am. The children who played with Lily and Rose without their parents pulling them away. Silverbrook would never be perfect. There would always be whispers, always be some who remembered the accusations and chose to believe them. But there were more who remembered the truth, who'd seen Garrett dragged away in chains, who understood that they'd been lied to and manipulated by men they should have been able to trust. And slowly the town healed, just like Clara, just like all of them. The first snow of the following winter came on a Tuesday. Clara was in the kitchen when she saw it start, fat, lazy flakes drifting down from a gray sky. She stopped what she was doing and went to the window, watching the world turn white. "You okay?" Caleb had come up behind her, his hands settling warm on her shoulders. "I'm okay," she said. "Just remembering. The blizzard. All of it. Finding the girls. Losing Daniel. Being arrested." She leaned back into his chest. "Standing in that square while you walked through the crowd to claim me. Best decision I ever made. You didn't even know me. I knew enough." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I knew my daughters believed in you. That was enough." Clara turned in his arms. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't listened to them? If you'd just gone home and left me there?" "Sometimes." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Late at night when I can't sleep, I think about how close we came to missing each other, how easily things could have gone wrong. But they didn't." "No, they didn't." She stretched up and kissed him softly. "Thank you. For listening to them. For choosing me when you had every reason not to. I'd choose you again in a heartbeat. 1,000 times. 1,000,000. Even knowing everything that came after, the danger, the fear, Garrett and Harding and all of it. Especially knowing all of that." Caleb cupped her face in his hands. "Because all of that led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. She'd cried more in the past year than she had in her whole life. But these were different tears. Good tears. The kind that came from having too much love to hold inside. "Mama! Papa!" The twins came bursting through the back door, tracking snow across the floor. Clara had just swept their cheeks red and their eyes bright with excitement. "It's snowing," Lily announced, as if they couldn't see perfectly well through the window. "We want to build a snowman," Rose added. "Can we please?" Clara laughed and wiped her eyes. "Let me get my coat." They spent the afternoon in the yard, building what had to be the most lopsided snowman in Montana Territory history. Caleb lifted the girls to place the coal eyes. Clara wrapped her own scarf around the lumpy neck. They stepped back to admire their work and dissolved into laughter at how ridiculous it looked. "It's beautiful," Lily declared. "It's perfect," Rose agreed. And standing there in the falling snow, surrounded by the family she'd never expected to have Clara found, she couldn't argue. It was perfect. All of it. That night, after the twins were in bed and the fire was burning low, Clara and Caleb sat together on the porch watching the snow fall. "I have something to tell you," Clara said. Caleb looked at her, a question in his eyes. She took his hand and pressed it to her stomach. "I'm pregnant." The silence stretched for 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. Then Caleb's face broke into a smile so wide and bright that Clara forgot how to breathe. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. Doctor confirmed it last week. I wanted to wait for the right moment to tell you. And the right moment was freezing on the porch in December. The right moment was now, right here in the snow, in the place where everything started." Caleb pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she thought her ribs might crack. She felt his shoulders shaking and realized he was crying. Her strong, steady husband, the man who'd stared down a corrupt marshal without flinching, was crying into her hair. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "God, Clara, I love you so much." "I love you too." They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, talking about names and nurseries, and whether the twins would be happy about a sibling. The answer to that last question, they decided, was a resounding yes. The girls had been asking for a baby brother or sister almost as long as they'd been calling Clara Mama. When they finally went to bed, Caleb curved his body around hers, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "For what? For staying, for fighting, for not giving up even when everything seemed hopeless." Clara laced her fingers through his. "Thank you for giving me something worth fighting for." Sleep came easily that night, deep and dreamless and warm. Outside, the snow continued to fall. It covered the yard and the barn and the crooked little snowman. It softened the world, made everything clean and new. And in the morning, when the twins came bursting into their parents' room demanding breakfast and attention and love, Clara opened her arms and gathered them close. "We have news," she said. "Good news or bad news?" Lily asked suspiciously. "The best news." Clara glanced at Caleb, who nodded encouragingly. "How would you two feel about being big sisters?" The screaming that followed could probably be heard in Helena. Spring came again, and with it new life. Clara's belly grew round and heavy as the snow melted and the first flowers pushed through the soil. The twins became her constant shadows, touching her stomach and talking to the baby, arguing about names and whether it would be a boy or a girl. Samuel visited for a week in April, bringing news from Denver and presents for his future niece or nephew. He looked at Clara, healthy and happy and glowing with pregnancy, and shook his head in wonder. "I barely recognize you," he said, "and I mean that in the best possible way. I barely recognize myself sometimes. Daniel would be proud of you. You know that, right?" "I know." Clara touched her stomach, feeling the baby kick. "I think about him sometimes. Wonder what he'd think of all this." "He'd think you deserve every bit of it. He'd think Caleb was the luckiest man alive. Caleb tells me that himself, at least 3 times a day." Samuel laughed. "Good. That's exactly as it should be." The baby came on a warm night in May, when the stars were bright overhead and the creek was rushing high with snowmelt. It was a boy, small and perfect, with dark hair like his mother and gray eyes like his father. They named him Daniel Samuel Thornton. Daniel for the man who'd died protecting Clara. Samuel for the brother who'd helped save her. When Caleb placed the baby in Clara's arms for the first time, she cried. Of course she cried. But these were the best kind of tears, the kind that came from a heart so full it had no choice but to overflow. "He's beautiful," Caleb whispered. "He's perfect." "You're perfect," Clara laughed weakly. "I'm exhausted and sweaty, and I probably look like I've been trampled by horses." "You've never looked more beautiful to me." Caleb kissed her forehead. "Thank you. For him. For all of it." The twins crept into the room, their eyes huge, as they got their first look at their baby brother. "He's so small," Rose breathed. "Was I that small?" Lily demanded. "Smaller," Caleb said. "Both of you." "Can I hold him?" Rose asked. Clara shifted carefully and guided the baby into Rose's arms, keeping her own hands close, just in case. Rose looked down at her brother with an expression of fierce protective love that was far too old for a 7-year-old. "I'm going to take care of you," she told the baby solemnly. "Just like the Snow Lady took care of us. I'm going to keep you safe forever." Clara met Caleb's eyes over their children's heads. Saw her own emotion reflected back at her. This was it. This was what they'd fought for. What they'd nearly died for. This was home. Years passed. The children grew. The ranch prospered. Lily and Rose shot up like weeds, all long limbs and wild hair and fierce opinions. They learned to ride almost before they learned to read, spending hours in the saddle, helping their father with the horses. They fought like cats and protected each other like wolves, and they never ever forgot the woman who'd saved them in the snow. Daniel Danny, they called him, grew into a thoughtful, serious boy, with his mother's dark hair and his father's quiet strength. He followed Clara everywhere, helping in the garden, asking endless questions, absorbing everything she could teach him. And then there was another, a girl this time, born on Christmas morning, while snow fell outside the window. They named her Margaret Rose, after the 2 women who'd shaped their family, Caleb's first wife, and the daughter who'd inherited her grandmother's gentle spirit. Maggie, they called her. And she was every bit as wild and wonderful as her sisters had been. Silverbrook grew too. The town that had once been Garrett's kingdom transformed into something better. a place where people looked out for each other, where justice meant something, where the ghosts of the past were remembered but no longer feared. They put up a memorial in the town square, not to Garrett, of course, but to all the people Harding and his men had hurt over the years. Clara had helped design it, a simple stone marker with names carved into its face. Daniel's name was there along with dozens of others. Once a year, on the anniversary of the town meeting that had changed everything, people gathered at the memorial to remember. Clara always spoke. It was hard every time to stand in the place where she'd once been tied to a post and condemned. But it was important too. Some stories needed to be told. Some truths needed to be repeated year after year so they wouldn't be forgotten. "Mama!" Clara turned from the window to find Danny standing in the doorway, 10 years old and solemn, looking at her with eyes that saw too much. "What is it, sweetheart? Can you tell me the story again about how you met Papa?" Clara smiled and held out her hand. He crossed to her and settled into her side the way he'd been doing since he was small. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Start from the beginning." So she did. She told him about the blizzard, about finding 2 little girls in the snow, about giving away her grandmother's blanket, about waking up 3 days later with no memory of what she'd done. She told him about Daniel, about the investigation, about the night her world fell apart. She told him about the cell and the beatings, about standing in the square while the marshal tried to break her, about the moment she looked up and saw a man walking toward her through a hostile crowd. She told him about his sisters whispering, "Papa, that's her." About his father cutting her loose, draping his coat over her shoulders, taking her home. She told him about the fever and the memories flooding back. About Samuel's arrival with the evidence that would save her. About the town meeting where the truth finally came out. And she told him about the wedding under the cottonwoods. About the first snowfall and the pregnancy and the moment she finally let herself believe she might be happy. "That's a good story," Danny said when she finished. "It's a true story. That's better. Do you think it could happen again? To someone else?" Clara thought about the question. Really thought about it. "I think there are always going to be people who try to hurt others. People who use power to do terrible things." She pulled him closer. "But I also think there are always going to be people who stand up, who refuse to look away, who choose to do the right thing even when it's dangerous. Like Papa did. Like Papa did. Like your Uncle Samuel. Like all the people who helped us when we needed it most." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he looked up at her with those serious gray eyes. "I want to be like that," he said. "When I grow up, I want to be someone who helps." Clara's heart swelled with pride. "Then you will be. I know it." That evening, the whole family gathered for supper. Caleb at the head of the table, Clara at the foot, with 4 children crammed in between. Lily and Rose were 17 now, on the verge of adulthood, already attracting the attention of young men from neighboring ranches. Danny was quiet and thoughtful, reading every book he could get his hands on. Maggie was 6 years old and absolutely feral, climbing everything in sight and giving her parents gray hair. It was chaos. It was perfect. "I got a letter today," Caleb announced as they ate. "From the territorial governor." Clara raised an eyebrow. "What does he want?" "To thank us. Apparently the investigation into Harding's operation just concluded. Final convictions, final sentences. It's officially over." The table went quiet. "Over," Lily repeated. "All of it," Caleb confirmed. "The last of Harding's men will hang next month. Every stolen piece of land has been returned to its rightful owners or their heirs. Every forged document has been destroyed." Clara set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "It took 10 years, she said quietly. "It took 10 years, but it's done." Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. "You did that, Clara. You and Samuel. If you hadn't stood up that day, if you hadn't told the truth, no matter how scared you were, none of this would have happened. We did that. Clara corrected. All of us, together. Caleb smiled. Together. The word hung in the air like a blessing. Later that night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Clara slipped outside onto the porch. The stars were bright overhead, thick and endless, in a way they only got this far from city lights. She heard the door open behind her, felt Caleb's arms wrap around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. Nothing." She leaned back into his warmth. "How lucky we are. How easily it could have gone differently. But it didn't." No, it didn't. They stood together in the darkness, looking out at the ranch they'd built, the life they'd made. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Clara asked. "When you brought me home." "I said a lot of things that first night. Probably most of them were stupid." She laughed softly. "You said if I wanted to stay, I was welcome as long as I liked. And you've stayed. 11 years. 11 years. Caleb pressed his lips to her temple. "Best 11 years of my life." Clara turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. There was gray in his hair now, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when they met, but he was still the man who'd walked through a hostile crowd to claim her. Still the man who'd listened to his daughters when no one else would. Still the man she loved more than she'd ever thought possible. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For choosing me. For fighting for me. For giving me a home and a family and a life I never dared dream I could have. You don't have to thank me. You've given me just as much. I know. But I wanted to say it anyway. I wanted you to know that I know. That I never take any of this for granted." Caleb kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you, Clara Thornton." "I love you, Caleb Thornton." They went inside together, leaving the cold and the stars behind. The house was warm, full of the sounds of sleeping children and banked fires. Clara paused in the hallway, looking at the family photographs that lined the walls. Their wedding day, each child's birth, Christmases and birthdays and ordinary moments made precious by the fact that they existed at all. Once she'd been a woman tied to a post waiting to die. Now she was this: a wife, a mother, a survivor who'd learned how to live again. She thought about Daniel sometimes, wondered if he was watching from wherever people went after they died. She hoped he was proud of her, hoped he knew that his sacrifice hadn't been in vain. She thought about her grandmother's blanket lost somewhere in that long-ago storm. The blanket she'd given to 2 little girls she didn't know. The blanket that had started everything. She thought about fate and providence and the strange winding paths that led people to each other. And she thought about love. The kind that asked for nothing, the kind that gave everything, the kind that looked at a beaten, broken woman and saw something worth saving. Clara climbed the stairs and checked on each of her children. Lily and Rose nearly grown sleeping in the room they'd always shared. Danny with a book fallen open on his chest, lost in dreams. Maggie sprawled sideways in her bed covers, kicked off, mouth open. She covered them all, kissed their foreheads, whispered words of love they probably couldn't hear. Then she went to her own room where Caleb was already in bed waiting for her. She climbed in beside him, fitting herself against his side the way she'd done for 11 years. "Good night, Mrs. Thornton," he murmured. "Good night, Mr. Thornton." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first hint of autumn. Inside, the house settled around them, warm and safe and full of love. Clara closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she dreamed of snow. But in the dream, she wasn't cold anymore. She wasn't scared. She was standing under the cottonwoods by the creek, watching her children play with her husband's hand in hers, and a whole lifetime stretching out before them. She woke with tears on her face and a smile on her lips. Because some stories don't end with happily ever after. Some stories end with something better. Something real. Clara Thornton had once been a woman accused of murder, tied to a post and left to die. She had been beaten and starved and broken in ways that should have destroyed her. But she had survived. She had fought. She had loved and built something beautiful from the ashes of everything she'd lost. And now, 11 years later, she was exactly where she belonged. She was home.